This afternoon, President Biden, as I spoke earlier, traveled to the battleground state of Pennsylvania, using the historic site of Valley Forge for a campaign speech at the location where the Continental Army, literally commanded by General George Washington, endured a winter encampment before they defeated the British crown. Well, by the way, speaking of that winter encampment from President George Washington, today President Biden spoke there, but his speech was rescheduled. It was supposed to be tomorrow on the third anniversary of January 6th, but due to weather concerns, they changed it to today. So the similarities between George Washington and Joe Biden are not that numerous. We'll just put it that way. Nonetheless, President Biden did not allow the weather changing his schedule to stop him from borrowing a phrase that George Washington used when he claimed that the upcoming presidential election might test whether or not democracy remains a sacred cause for our nation. Well, how will this message play? Frankly, now that so much of the American public increasingly is rejecting Biden's January 6th narrative. Well, joining me now to discuss this is Congressman Ron Estes. He serves on the House Committee on Ways and Means, as well as the Budget Committee and the Committee on Education and Workforce. He represents the 4th Congressional District of the great state of Kansas. Congressman Estes, welcome back to Washington Watch. Great to have you.
Well, thank you, Jody. Happy New Year to you. It's good being with you again.
Well, thank you so much, and Happy New Year to you as well. All right, let's begin with your reaction to the president's first campaign speech of the year today.
Yeah, it's really interesting that that's going to be his strategy on a campaign, because he can't run on his record. He's had 3 years of failure, whether it's talking about the inflation that they've created. I mean, they've even gone out and had to create new statistics for inflation around a 6-month inflation act because they've been so bad in terms of their numbers. They've created an environment where Putin could invade Ukraine and embolden Iran to go support Hamas in their attack on Israel. They killed and created an incentive in Afghanistan, where the terrorists not only took over Afghanistan, but were able to kill several servicemen, men and women in Afghanistan. So it's really not surprising that they're trying to deflect from that record, but it is very hypocritical that President Biden wants to talk about threats to democracy when you talk about his Internal Revenue Service won't go after and charge his son and collect the taxes from him, had to get a court order to actually make that happen. The Department of Justice goes after parents because they want to make sure that their children have good education. They go after pro-life supporters because they have a different political view. So it really is an abysmal record that President Biden has in terms of a threat to democracy on his own avenue.
Yeah, those are some excellent points, Congressman. As I shared in the opener, President Biden is somehow asserting that a vote against him in November would be a vote against freedom and democracy. In fact, let's go ahead. I've got another clip that is along those similar lines. I'd like to play this and get your reaction.
This is the first national election since January 6th. Insurrection placed a dagger at the throat of American democracy since that moment. After all we've been through in our history, from independence to civil war to 2 world wars to a pandemic to insurrection, I refuse to believe that in 2024 we Americans will choose to walk away from what's made us the greatest nation in the history of the world.
Wow, you just gave us several examples. I wanted to play this, but give me your thoughts on this claim that Americans who don't vote for Biden this November are somehow against freedom, democracy, and these things that make our nation so great.
Well, actually, a vote for Biden is a vote that's a threat to democracy, just because you look at what he's done with the federal government and how much he's used that to go after attacking the average, everyday American citizens who want to raise their kids, who want to do their job, who want to focus on the freedoms that they enjoy, whether it's being able to advocate for a political position or not. And, you know, the only thing that I could say that's a similarity is that in Valley Forge, there's winter weather during George Washington's time, and there's winter weather in January with Biden's in office. But there's certainly no statesmanship coming out of President Biden's office that you compare to President Washington.
Good point. If I can, because our time is slipping away, I'd like to switch topics if I can. You have just come back from a border trip, and you have witnessed firsthand just how enormous the crisis has become. You were there. Tell us what you saw.
Yeah, it really is. I've been to the border before, and conditions are still the same. I mean, you see people that are just blatantly walking across the river, walking across the border, and a Biden administration is not doing anything to stop it. I mean, it was very successful policies that the United States had when President Trump was in office. The Remain in Mexico policy was a great policy of keeping folks who came to the United States trying to cross the border and did not have a legal reason to do that, keep them in Mexico before they came across the border. And now the Biden administration with Secretary Mayorkas, basically they've opened the doors. They've allowed anybody to come across. They've distorted the processes and the laws that we had in terms of the parole process, which was intended to be on a unique case-by-case situation. They've basically opened it up for people from countrywide to come in to the country. As I said, the Remain in Mexico policy was a great policy that actually kept people in Mexico so that they didn't come into the United States to overwhelm our border patrol. And one of the things that I took away from being down at Eagle Pass was that when the cartels surge people across the border and the border patrols pulled into having processed those individuals, they're not patrolling the border. And it makes us unsafe with all the folks that come across the border. And we need to get back to those good policies. We need to put those in place. Secretary Mayorkas should be doing that instead of telling Congress he has operational control of the border because it was very evident that he does not.
Well, very evident. Last question here for you. When Congress returns next week, I'm thrilled to see what appears to be great unity with the conference over this issue. But how will we see this border crisis play out as the spending negotiations come back to the table once you come back next week?
Yeah, we've got a lot of things going on, and talking about the border, the House has passed the HR 2, and the Senate needs to pick that up. Senate needs to get to work on several things, not just the border security, but also as we talk through this negotiations on spending. We can't continue down the same path that we've been the last several years and just continue to spend more and more every year and say that's an adequate approach. It's not right. As we're seeing now, our national debt's continuing to grow. 2023 was a tipping point in terms of the amount of money that was borrowed compared to our discretionary spending. And we've got to work to restrain that spending. And we've got some tough choices, and we've got to be able to make those both on the discretionary side as well as some of those automatic spending programs as well.
Well, Kansas Congressman Ron Estes, we are so grateful that you are one in the driver's seat there. Thank you so much for joining us on Washington Watch, and look forward to having you back on here as these stories continue to unfold.